The call came on a Tuesday morning and I almost didn't answer it. I was sitting in my car outside a gas station 3 days after my mother's funeral, eating a granola bar because I hadn't been able to afford a proper meal since I'd been forced out of my childhood home. My phone screen lit up with a number I didn't recognize, a local area code but no name. Something told me to pick up. I don't know why. Maybe Mom was still watching over me. "Is this Sarah Calloway?" the man on the other end said, his voice measured and formal. "Yes," I said. "My name is Richard Ames. I was your mother's attorney." "I need to ask you something very important." He paused. "Did your sister show you the second sealed envelope?" My hand went cold around the phone. But what I'm about to tell you, even I didn't see it coming. My mother, Diane Calloway, was the kind of woman who kept flowers on the kitchen windowsill even in January. She worked as a school librarian for 31 years. She raised 2 daughters mostly on her own after our father left when I was 9 and my sister Renee was 12. She saved carefully, invested quietly, and by the time she passed, on March 4th, after a long battle with ovarian cancer, she had built something remarkable: a paid-off home in Westfield, New Jersey. Savings, investments, a life's worth of careful choices totaling just over $3.2 million. She also had 2 very different daughters. I'm 29. I work as a pediatric nurse, which means long hours, modest pay, and a kind of fulfillment that doesn't show up in a bank account. I had been living with Mom for the last 14 months of her life, not because I had nowhere else to go, but because she needed someone there. I gave her medications at 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. I drove her to chemotherapy every other Thursday. I held her hand through the nights when the pain was too much. I didn't do it for the inheritance. I did it because she was my mother, and she was dying, and I loved her. Renee is 32. She lived in a beautiful apartment in Manhattan. She visited 4 times in those 14 months. 4 times. She always had a reason. Work was busy. Traffic was terrible. She'd send flowers instead. Mom never complained about it out loud, but I saw her face whenever Renee called to cancel another visit. She would smile and say, "That's all right, sweetheart," and then she'd go very quiet. That quietness told me everything. Here is what I want you to understand about Renee. She is not obviously cruel. She is charming. She dresses beautifully, speaks confidently, and knows exactly how to be the most impressive person in any room. At the funeral, she cried in a way that made everyone around her want to comfort her. She had tissues tucked into her sleeve. She accepted hugs from relatives I had spent the last year caring for her mother alongside. She looked devastated. I remember watching her and feeling something strange settle in my chest. Not anger. Something quieter than anger. Something more like recognition. The first warning sign had come 6 weeks before Mom died. I had walked into the living room to find Renee sitting at the desk, Mom's desk, going through a drawer. She looked up when she heard me, and for one single second, there was something sharp and calculating in her eyes. Then she smiled. "Just looking for the remote," she said. The remote was on the coffee table. It had been there all morning. I didn't say anything. I told myself she was grieving. I told myself people do strange things when they're losing a parent. I gave her the benefit of the doubt, the way I always had my entire life, the way our mother had quietly asked us both to love each other even when it was hard. That was my flaw, my one real flaw. I was too willing to believe the best of people, even people who had already shown me glimpses of something else. Mom passed on a Thursday evening. By Saturday morning, Renee had already spoken to someone, I still don't know who, because when I came downstairs that day, she was sitting at the kitchen table with a manila folder in front of her, and she looked at me with a calm, deliberate expression that I had never seen on her face before. She slid a document across the table. "The will was straightforward," she said. "The house and all assets come to me. As the eldest," she smiled, "you have 48 hours to pack your things. Don't come back." I looked at her for a long moment. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't throw the document back across the table the way every nerve in my body wanted me to. I picked it up. I read it slowly, line by line, the way you read something when you're trying to make sure you're not misunderstanding it. Because surely, I was misunderstanding it. But the language was clear. The will, dated 2 years prior, left the entirety of Mom's estate to Renee Lynn Calloway, eldest daughter. The house, the savings accounts, the investment portfolio, everything that our mother had spent 30 years building with tired hands and careful choices, all of it signed over to a woman who had visited her dying mother 4 times in 14 months. I set the document down on the table. "Okay," I said, "just that." One word. Renee blinked, like she had been expecting a fight and didn't know what to do without one. Then she nodded, satisfied, and picked up her coffee cup. I went upstairs. I sat on the edge of the bed in the room where I had lived for over a year, in the house where I had grown up, and I stared at the wall. I did not cry yet. The tears would come later, alone in the parking lot of a Marriott off Route 22, where I would spend the next 6 nights on a credit card I could barely afford. But in that moment, sitting in the silence of my mother's house, something shifted inside me. Not rage, something colder than rage, something that required patience. I left the next morning. I packed one large suitcase, clothes, my nursing license documents, my laptop, a small framed photo of Mom and me at her retirement party in 2019. I did not take anything that wasn't mine. Not a dish, not a book, not one of the small ceramic birds Mom kept on the hallway shelf that I had loved since childhood. Renee watched me from the doorway as I carried my suitcase to my car. She didn't offer to help. She didn't say goodbye. She just watched, arms crossed, and when I reached my car and turned back to look at the house one last time, she had already gone inside. The door was closed. That was March 7th. By March 10th, I had received the phone call from Richard Ames. Here is what I had not known. What none of us had known, except apparently Richard and my mother, was that Mom had visited the attorney's office a second time, alone, 8 months before she died on the Tuesday afternoon in July. While Renee was in Manhattan and I was at work, she had gone in, sat down, and instructed Richard to prepare a second document, a sealed envelope, separate from the official will, to be held in the attorney's files and opened only under specific conditions. The condition was this: if the primary will was executed without contest, the sealed envelope was to remain sealed. But if the executor, Renee, failed to disclose the existence of the envelope to all beneficiaries within 72 hours of the will reading, the envelope would be opened by the attorney and its contents made legally binding under a clause Mom had specifically built into the original will. Renee had known about the envelope. Richard confirmed it. She had been informed of its existence at the will reading. She had been told clearly that she was required to disclose it to me within 72 hours. She had looked at the attorney, nodded, and signed the acknowledgement form with her own hand. Then she had come home and said nothing. She had handed me a one-sided document, told me I had 48 hours to leave, and smiled over her coffee cup. The 72-hour window had closed at 2 p.m. on March 9th. Richard Ames called me at 11:47 a.m. on March 10th. "The clause has been triggered," he told me, his voice calm and professional. "I'll need you to come into the office as soon as you're available. There are some things your mother wanted you to know." I sat in my car outside that gas station, granola bar forgotten in my lap, and I felt something rise in my chest that I hadn't felt in days. Not happiness, not triumph, something quieter than both of those things. It felt like my mother's hand, reaching across whatever distance now existed between us and resting gently on my shoulder. I started the car. I had one stop to make first, and I needed to think very carefully about how I was going to handle the next 24 hours. Because I had learned something important watching Renee operate. The best moves are made slowly, and I was not going to waste mine. Richard Ames had a corner office on the 4th floor of a brick building on Elm Street in downtown Westfield. I had driven past it 100 times without ever going inside. I sat across from his desk on March 11th at 10 a.m., still wearing the same jacket I had worn to the funeral, and I watched him place a white envelope on the desk between us. My mother's handwriting was on the front, just my name, Sarah. I hadn't seen her handwriting in 3 days, and the sight of it nearly broke me open right there in that office. I pressed my hands flat against my knees and breathed. Richard slid the envelope toward me. "She was very specific about what she wanted," he said quietly. "She told me she hoped you'd never need to open this, but she said she knew her daughters, both of them." I opened the envelope. Inside were 3 things. A handwritten letter from my mother, 4 pages long, written in the careful cursive she had used her entire life. A second legal document, notarized and witnessed, dated July 14th of the previous year, and a USB drive, small and silver, with a piece of masking tape on it that said, "For Soraya." Watch this alone first. The legal document came first because Richard walked me through it line by line. What it said, what my mother had quietly, methodically constructed 8 months before she died, was this: the house was not Renee's to keep. Under the secondary clause, triggered by Renee's failure to disclose, ownership of the property transferred entirely to me. Additionally, a separate account, one Renee had not been told about, held $847,000, money Mom had moved quietly over the course of 2 years. Money she had described in her letter as the portion set aside for the daughter who stayed. There was more. The investment accounts Renee believed were hers outright were structured as a conditional inheritance, conditions Renee had already violated by failing to disclose the envelope. Richard would be sending her a certified letter that afternoon. I sat with all of that information settling over me like something heavy and warm. I thought about Renee's face when she slid that document across the kitchen table, the way she had crossed her arms in the doorway, the closed front door. She had been so certain. I went back to my Marriott room that evening and I watched what was on the USB drive. It was a video. My mother, sitting in her favorite chair by the living room window, the one with the blue cushion she had reupholstered herself in 2017, looking directly into the camera with the particular steadiness she had when she had made up her mind about something. She spoke for 22 minutes. She talked about both of us. She was fair, she always was. She acknowledged that Renee was driven and capable and that she loved her. But she also said, plainly and without drama, that she had watched carefully during her illness. She had noticed who came. She had noticed who called at 6 a.m. to make sure her medications were taken. She had noticed who held her hand. Near the end of the video, she looked into the camera and said, "Sarah, I knew you wouldn't fight for yourself, so I did it for you. I hope you're not angry with me for the way I did this." I needed to see what Renee would choose when she thought no one was watching. I had to pause the video there. I sat in that hotel room for a long time. She had known. She had set the whole thing in motion, quietly, the way she did everything, not with confrontation, but with patience and precision. She had given Renee the choice, 72 hours to do the right thing, to come to me, to sit down, to say, "Mom left something for both of us, let's talk." Renee had chosen in less than 48 hours. She just hadn't chosen correctly. The certified letter reached Renee on March 12th at 9:47 a.m. I know the exact time because Richard's office sent me a confirmation. Her attorney called Richard that same afternoon. Then she called me 3 times. I let every call go to voicemail. I had nothing left to say. My mother had already said it all. I moved back into the house on March 19th. I put fresh flowers on the kitchen windowsill the first morning, the way Mom always did, even in winter. I stood there in the quiet of her kitchen and I let myself cry, finally, completely, without holding anything back. Renee lost the investment accounts. She kept a portion of the liquid savings because Mom was fair even in this, but she lost the house. She lost the $847,000. She lost the version of herself she had shown everyone at that funeral. Last I heard, she had moved out of her Manhattan apartment. Mutual relatives have stopped calling her back. I don't feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that. I feel tired and sad and grateful in that order. Grateful for a mother who loved me enough to think 14 steps ahead. Grateful that she knew, even at the end, that the quietest love is sometimes the most powerful kind. She didn't leave me a message asking me to forgive Renee. She left me a house and flowers on the windowsill and 22 minutes of her voice. That was enough. That was everything. If you were in my position, if someone you trusted showed you exactly who they were the moment the door closed, what would you have done?